"Step aside, sweetheart. This isn't a buffet for civilians. Marines eat first." The shove came with the sentence, one motion, one open palm against her right shoulder, delivered with the bored efficiency of a man who has never once had to calculate the risk of touching someone. He's decided doesn't matter. Captain Brock Halverson didn't look at her when he did it. That was the tell. A man who looks when he shoves is uncertain about what comes next. Halverson was not uncertain. He had already turned back to the chow line before the force had finished traveling through her frame, because in his mind, the interaction was already complete. He had moved an obstacle. The obstacle was gone. That was the sum of it. She was not gone. Her right hip rotated. Clean. Controlled. The motion belonged to a combatives curriculum that is not taught in weekend courses or civilian self-defense programs. It came from somewhere that produces a different kind of person entirely. From hours of repetition, in rooms with mats on the floor and no windows. From a body that has been trained to receive force and redirect it the way water redirects around stone. The rotation absorbed the shove completely. She didn't stumble. She didn't grab for the rail. Her tray didn't tilt, and her coffee didn't spill. And she recovered her balance in under 1 second and returned to her place in the line as though Captain Halverson had never put his hand on her. Her face registered nothing. Her posture didn't change. She looked forward. She did not say a word. The dining facility at 1340 hours on a Tuesday in Southern California. 150 Marines filling the long tables in the officers' and senior NCO combined overflow room. 8 Allied liaison officers running pay grades, 03 through 05, a Norwegian major, 2 British lieutenants, a German Oberstleutnant, and 4 others. 2 civilian observers in visitor badges working tablets at the far table, and 1 woman in a civilian polo shirt wearing a contractor lanyard that read Resilience Dynamics LLC in dark sans serif above the name strip. Sterling, Phi, Behavioral Health and Readiness Consultant. The room ran at the volume institutional rooms always run. Silverware against trays, boots on sealed concrete, low conversation threading in a dozen directions, the particular percussion of 160 people moving through a meal in a space designed for efficiency rather than comfort. It was day 2 of a 5-day symposium. NATO Interoperability Working Group. The kind of event where Allied officers ate lunch with Marine captains, and everyone traded business cards, and the food was the same as every other military dining facility in the continental United States. Nobody saw the shove the way it was needed to be seen. A Norwegian 04 at the Allied liaison table glanced up from his tray. 2 British 03s exchanged a look, the particular look of people from a culture that finds American loudness mildly embarrassing and has learned, diplomatically, not to say so. Neither said anything. The junior Marines near the incident did not look up. The civilian observers were looking at their tablets. By the time a full second had passed, the room had already absorbed what happened and moved on. Because rooms move on. Because that is what rooms do. Because a civilian contractor getting shoved in a chow line does not stop a dining facility from running at 1340 hours. Halverson moved to the officers' section and sat down. He said something to his aide, young, smooth-faced, a second lieutenant named Caradon, who laughed at everything Halverson said at approximately the right moment. Halverson reached for a water glass. He did not look back across the room. Not once. She had already been filed and forgotten. That was the first mistake. That was, in fact, the mistake from which every subsequent mistake descended. She carried her tray to a corner seat near the east wall. Not the nearest seat. Not the most convenient seat. The seat with the widest, unobstructed sight line to 3 of the 4 exits, and set the tray down without checking the chair, and sat. She reached for her fork, and then, without turning her head, without lifting her chin, without any shift in her posture or change in her expression, her eyes moved. Wall to door, door to window. Window to the second entrance on the south wall. Second entrance across to the emergency exit. Emergency exit back to the main entrance. 12 seconds. Flat. Clean. Edge to edge, the way a hand runs across a surface checking for imperfections. Nothing hurried, and nothing skipped, and nothing lingered on. No fixation point. No pause. When the sweep completed, her eyes returned to her tray, and she ate. At the senior NCO table, 8 meters to her left, Sergeant Major Linus Thrussell set down his fork. He was 53 years old, 26 years in uniform, a career that had moved through infantry deployments and staff billets and leadership assignments that would read, on the surface, like a standard Marine Corps progression for a man who had made himself indispensable at every level. Underneath that progression, invisible to the official record, were 8 years that did not appear on any organizational chart and did not use unit designations that could be repeated in a building with unlocked windows. He had come back to the green side by choice, back to a battalion, back to a clear chain of command, back to a world where the mission statements were unclassified and the dining facility served the same food on a rotation. He was the battalion sergeant major. It was good work. It was honest work. He was watching. Not obviously. A career NCO's observation is invisible from 8 meters. The body language reads as settled, as resting, as a man with no particular interest in the corner of the room. He watched her eyes finish the sweep. He watched her cut a piece of food and bring it to her mouth. He watched her do nothing else for the next 4 minutes, and the nothing was its own kind of information, because a woman who has just been shoved in a room full of 150 uniformed people by a captain who outranks the entire institutional setting she has access to, and who has not apologized and will not apologize, sits with the stillness of a person who has already processed the incident and filed it and moved on to the next tactical consideration. Not suppression, not shock, not dignity being reassembled. Forward motion. The sterile black watch on her left wrist caught the overhead light when she reached for her coffee. Face down on the inside of the wrist. Matte black band. Not a fashion piece. Not a statement. A tool worn in a specific way for a specific reason that has nothing to do with aesthetics. Thrussell's fork stayed on the table. Across the room, Halverson said something that made Caradon laugh. 2 other captains at the table grinned without fully knowing what they were grinning at. The Allied liaison officers ate quietly with the practiced neutrality of people who have learned that Allied lunch events are easier when you maintain plausible deniability about everything you've witnessed. The civilian observers tapped at their tablets. The dining facility ran its noise. In the corner, 12 seconds ran again. Wall to door, door to window, window to entrance. Clean as a compass bearing. Thrussell watched it complete. He had seen that particular habit exactly once before, in a man who had spent 3 consecutive years running direct action operations in environments that required knowing every exit before you needed it. The man had brought the habit home and never shed it. Thrussell had not seen it in 8 years. He was seeing it now, across a dining facility in Southern California, in a woman wearing a contractor lanyard and a civilian polo shirt. He set his fork down very carefully and did not pick it up again. The afternoon moved through the institutional rhythm of a 5-day symposium, a coalition readiness brief in the main auditorium, a bilateral working session in Secondary Room C, a 1,500 hours coffee break, where people stood in corridors and said things they would say again tomorrow, because the conversations at events like this have a carrying capacity and tend to fill it with the same material. She moved through all of it in the polo and the lanyard, the Write-in-Rain field notebook riding in her left thigh pocket, the sterile watch never visible unless she reached for something. She reached for something at 13:42. An 05, a Marine lieutenant colonel named Akers, moving fast through the symposium corridor with a tablet under one arm and 3 other conversations already in progress. past her, and said, without fully stopping, the way people say things, without fully stopping when they are already halfway somewhere else. "What time you got, miss?" She answered without turning her full body toward him. 13:42, sir." Zero hesitation. Military format. "Sir." Not 1:42, and not 1:45, and not the civilian rendering of a civilian hour, the 24-hour format, spoken without apparent awareness that it was being spoken. The way people do things, they have done so many thousands of times that the thing stops being a choice and starts being breathing. Lieutenant Colonel Akers missed a step. He recovered and continued walking. He did not look back. But the tile had been placed on the table, and he filed it. A small, anomalous thing, face down, waiting for the pattern around it to emerge. The entrance rifle rack came an hour later. Sterling stood at the main entrance of the symposium building, waiting for an escort clearance. Routine contractor protocol. Nothing unusual. The kind of brief institutional pause that fills 6 minutes in the middle of a day. The M27 IARs sat in the rack beside the entrance, muzzles down, the way they always sat during symposium security protocols. She did not approach the rack. She did not touch it. She stood 4 meters away with her field notebook open and her pen moving, and she read the manufacturing lot stamp from that distance, from 4 meters, at a 45-degree angle to the label, and said, almost to herself, entirely conversationally, the way a person comments on something they have simply noticed. Second quarter, 2020 production. Running that lot at this base. The gunnery sergeant on door duty had been doing this job for 11 years. He looked at the rack. He looked at her. He looked at the rack again. She was already turned toward the approaching escort, thanking him in a way that suggested she had already forgotten the exchange. The gunnery sergeant stood for a moment, with the expression of a man who has heard something he cannot categorize, and is not sure what to do with it. Then he went back to his post. He mentioned it later to the duty officer in passing, not as a report, not as a formal notation, just the verbal equivalent of a tile placed face down on a table. The duty officer filed it the same way. Neither of them had a category for what they had just seen. They would, eventually, have the category built for them. By 1500 hours, Halverson had heard both stories. They had moved through the junior officer channels and arrived at him warped by retelling into a single portrait. A civilian playing at military, a contractor who had memorized a few pieces of vocabulary and was performing expertise for an audience that wasn't looking. He had a category for this. The category was annoying. He intercepted her in a side corridor with Caradon 1 step behind him. "You're here to run wellness surveys, Ms. Sterling." His voice carried the easy authority of a man whose father wore 3 retired stars and whose entire professional life had been conducted inside a safety net that he had never once had to acknowledge. Not to handle weapons assessments, not to talk equipment with the door NCO, not to make the gunny feel like he missed something. He let the silence sit 1 beat too long, the theatrical pause of a man who has confused confidence with competence for so long that the difference is no longer legible to him. "Sweetheart." She let him finish. Her expression did not move in any direction. "Of course, Captain." She resumed walking. Her pace didn't change. She didn't accelerate. She didn't look back. She simply continued in the direction she had been going, at the speed she had been moving, as though Halverson were a piece of furniture she had been required to briefly acknowledge. He watched her go. Caradon watched him watch. Neither said anything for a moment. Then Halverson made a sound in the back of his throat, dismissal dressed as contempt, and turned toward the briefing room. In the afternoon plenary, Thrussell sat in the back row with a watch on his knee, face up, held flat with 2 fingers. He found her in the front left section. He waited. Her eyes moved. 12 seconds. Wall to door, to window, to entrance. No head movement. No pause. And he counted with the watch. He put the watch in his pocket. He named it to himself for the first time, plainly. The horizon sweep, edge to edge, 12 seconds. Not a nervous habit, not a processing tick, not something you acquire, something you build over years of rooms where the exits matter, until it runs without your permission. The sweep was not civilian. The sweep was not standard military. It belonged to a specific tier of operational experience that does not appear on standard service records. When the session broke, he watched her gather her materials. One more sweep as she stood. 12 seconds. He tilted his head, barely. The very small tilt of a man who has just heard a phrase in a forgotten language click back into recognition. Then he stood and moved toward the corridor. Through the wire glass window in the door, visible for 2 more seconds, he pressed a phone to his ear. Dialing a number he had not dialed in 8 years. Day 2 gave way to day 3, and Halverson's irritation metastasized into something organized and institutional and precisely aimed. The nickname appeared overnight. Resilience Barbie originated in a junior officer group chat and moved fast through the encrypted app ecosystem that junior officers in every service use to say things they would not say in a room with senior NCOs present. By 0830 the next morning, someone had printed the nickname on a small adhesive label and taped it to the back of the chair assigned to Sterling V. Resilience Dynamics LLC in secondary briefing room C. Taped to the back, where she would see it when she pulled the chair out and sat, and the junior Marines on either side would see it for the length of the entire morning session. She saw it. She pulled the chair out. She sat down. She opened her notebook and uncapped her pen. The coffee came at morning break. Lance Corporal Del Pino was 22 years old and had the particular look of a young man who had been asked to do something he was not entirely comfortable with and had decided that being uncomfortable was better than the alternative. He was carrying a coffee cup he had not been asked to carry, moving through the narrow third-floor corridor at a time that put him at the same point in the corridor as Sterling at the same moment, and the cup tilted. Hot coffee went toward her boots, not on them, close enough to register as intentional to anyone who was paying attention. Del Pino said, "My bad," without looking at her. He kept walking. Sterling did not look down. She did not slow. She did not change direction or pace. She continued walking because she had been in rooms where a spilled cup was advance notice of something catastrophically worse, and the context calibration of a woman who has spent years in those rooms means that a clumsy lance corporal with a prop does not rise above background noise. The badge stopped working at mid-morning. She presented her contractor access card at the secondary annex checkpoint, the checkpoint that provided access to the 2 working spaces she had been cleared for, the clearances that were a matter of official record in 3 separate DoD databases. The duty officer ran the card once. He ran it twice. The reader returned dark. He checked the screen, ran it a 3rd time, and said, "Showing as invalid, ma'am." She asked when it had last been valid. He checked. Yesterday, 1700 hours. Something had changed overnight in the credential system. Through a glass partition at the far end of the corridor, Halverson was visible in conversation with the duty officer's supervisor. His back was to her. He did not turn around. She asked for the access reader ID number and the duty officer's name and rank, and wrote both in the write-in-rain notebook in small, even block letters. She did not raise her voice. By mid-afternoon, she had been excluded from 2 secured annexes she was cleared for, subjected to a corridor incident she had documented, and was operating with a lanyard that the base credential system considered invalid. She found a corner table in the dining facility, opened the notebook to a clean page, and wrote, date, time, each incident in sequence, full names where she had them, ranks, specific actions, precise locations, witnesses present. The entries were clean and without editorializing. She was not venting. She was not processing. She was building a record. Every entry was a federal exhibit in waiting, and she wrote each one with that destination in mind. Across the room, Halverson watched her. He said something to his aide, half audible, pitched to carry just far enough. She's not going to be here long enough to finish that notebook. He was wrong about that in ways that would take him 48 hours to fully understand. The sweep ran while she wrote. A lieutenant crossed behind her at 6 meters, and she tracked him, not by turning, not by lifting her pen from the page, only with her eyes, smooth and complete. 12 seconds edge to edge before she returned her gaze to the line she had been writing. She hadn't missed a sweep in 2.5 days. Sterling closed the notebook. She looked up. Her expression hadn't changed. If watching her absorb that in silence made your jaw clench, hit subscribe, you're going to want to be in the room when the door closes on him. Day 3, and the machinery shifted from social pressure to institutional architecture. The visitor log entry was waiting when she requested a routine contractor compliance copy at 0900. Conduct unbecoming. Obstructed unit movement. Non-compliant with escort protocols, Day 1. Signed by a name she did not recognize. She asked the administrative clerk for the signing authority's rank and billet. The clerk looked at the screen, and then at the desk, and then at the screen again. She wrote down the entry verbatim, every word, in the field notebook. She asked the clerk when the entry had been created. The clerk was unable to tell her. She thanked him and left. The formal complaint was filed with the Provost Marshal's office. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Mears delivered this information in the hallway outside the Provost Marshal's office, with the practiced ease of a man who has learned that delivering bad news you have personally arranged requires a very specific register. Sympathetic without being convincing. Regretful without being responsible. Mears was the battalion executive officer. He was lean and dry-voiced and possessed of the particular stillness of someone who has learned to keep the distance between what they know and what they show very precisely calibrated. His fingers didn't move when he talked. His eyes moved, but never to her eyes directly. A formal harassment complaint, filed with the Provost Marshal, Sterling's name as complainant. The target, a Marine Staff NCO whose name she had never written in her notebook because she had never spoken to him. She looked at the complaint. She asked for the time stamp of the filing. 0314 hours, Mears said. She wrote it down. She had been in her billeting room at 0314 hours. She had also, at 0314 hours, been logged into a secure government system on her encrypted device, making a scheduled status transmission to a DoD facility that logged the connection with a timestamp that existed independently of anything Mears or Halverson or anyone on this installation could reach or alter. The badge went dark at the main checkpoint at 0800. A private first class ran it twice, checked the screen, and said he couldn't let her through. He did not meet her eyes. He had been told to expect her. She stepped to the side, called a number on her civilian phone, and waited without arguing and without commentary, because it was not his fault, and she knew whose fault it was. Mid-morning, she approached the credentials duty officer with a specific request, delivered conversationally. The processing timeline for credential adjudication under the Memorandum of Understanding covering DoD contracted personnel access, and whether a SOFA Article 9 exception applied to contractor personnel in a joint service symposium environment. The duty officer stared at her. A behavioral health consultant does not know what a SOFA Article 9 exception is. A behavioral health consultant does not know what credential adjudication processing timelines look like or which memoranda govern them. He said he would look into it. She thanked him. She checked her watch, left wrist, inside, face down, and made a note of the time. At 18:30 hours, she returned to her billeting room and found a sealed envelope on the floor inside the door. No return address, no stamp. She picked it up and read it standing at the desk without sitting down. She read it a second time. She set it face down on the desk, opened the notebook, and added 2 lines to the record already in progress. Then she sat on the edge of the bunk. For one specific moment, different from operational stillness, different from the forward motion stillness she had maintained for 3 days. She was the stillness of a woman, running a very precise internal calculation, checking the sum from the top, verifying the result. Then she reached under the collar of her polo and checked the collar button camera with the tip of one finger. Still transmitting. Thrussell had spent 24 hours sitting with what he knew, and on the morning of day 4, he sat with it in his personal vehicle in the base parking lot at 0600 hours. Personal cell phone in his right hand, engine off, watching the light come up over the flight line. He dialed from memory. Former Master Sergeant Dion Carver, U.S. Army, now a GS-14 at the Pentagon, Special Operations Liaison, a man who owed him a straight answer from a debt that was 12 years old and had never been called in. The phone rang 4 times. Carver answered with his last name and nothing else. Thrussell kept his voice low. He was precise, and he was efficient, and he described what he had seen. A woman running a 12-second sweep, wall to door to window to exit. No head movement, no fixation. In a plenary room and a dining facility, and every corridor he had seen her in for 2.5 days. Reading a manufacturing lot stamp on a rack, M27 IAR, from 4 meters, and stating the production quarter, aloud, without being asked. Giving military time to an 05 mid-stride without appearing to notice she was doing it. The watch, the belt, no jewelry, no rings, not contractor habits, not prior service habits, current operator habits, the kind you only still carry if you are still in the environment that built them. Carver went quiet, long enough that Thrussell checked to see if the call had dropped. It had not. When Carver spoke, his voice had the particular careful quality of a man who has decided exactly what he is and is not willing to say. I can't confirm anything, Linus. What I can tell you is this. If she's who you think she is, walk away from this one. A pause, shorter than the first. And keep your name off whatever's happening around her. The line went dead. Carver had hung up. Thrussell sat with the phone in his hand and worked through what he now understood. Everything Halverson had done, the shove, the nickname, the access card, the fabricated complaint, the visitor log, the envelope, had been directed at a woman who was not what her lanyard said she was. Not approximately, not close, not in the same category. Halverson had spent 3 days escalating towards someone for whom his father's 3 retired stars were, at most, a consideration to be logged, and he had done it by providing her with documented federal evidence of his own conduct, one incident at a time, delivered to a collar-button camera, uploading continuously to Arlington, Virginia. He was building her case for her. He had been building it since Tuesday. Thrussell got out of his vehicle. He walked toward the building. 200 meters across the parade deck, Halverson moved with his aide, at the easy pace of a man who has never had to walk anywhere that had a cost attached to reaching it. Thrussell watched him. He could cover those 200 meters in under 90 seconds. 2 words, the right 2 words, would change the trajectory of the next 48 hours for a man who had, by Thrussell's honest assessment, no idea what trajectory he was on. He stood at the parking lot edge and watched Halverson cross the parade deck and disappear into the building. He did not move. Subscribe to Honor Tales. What the watcher just heard on that phone is the reason she walked into this base in the first place. 2200 hours. The billeting room dark except for the desk lamp. She opened the locked drawer in the bottom of her field kit with a key she kept separate from every other key she carried, in a pocket that was not the pocket you would search first. The drawer opened with the engineered quiet of something designed to open quietly in specific environments. Inside, 3 items. She lifted them out one at a time and set them on the desk. The challenge coin was matte black. No service branch crest on the face. No unit designation that would read under ambient light. She turned it over. On one side, a small embossed falcon, the kind of emblem that carries meaning only inside the specific room where it was presented, and carries it completely inside that room. On the other side, a date, raised in the metal. March 14th, 2023. She pressed the ball of her thumb across the date. Once. The way you press a bruise, not to test it, to confirm it's still there. The photograph was folded in thirds and had been folded and unfolded enough times that the creases were soft. 8 figures in full field gear. Faces turned away from the camera, or angled down, or lost in shadow. Standing in front of a C-17 on a strip of dark tarmac in low light. No location visible. No markings legible. Nothing that placed the image anywhere on any map. One of the figures had a hand on her shoulder. She knew which one. She had known every time she had looked at this photograph, which was many times, across 3 years. The letter was still in its envelope, and the envelope corners had gone soft from the same handling. She looked at the coin, the part of her mind that ran without stopping, that never stopped, even in sleep, that kept a version of the operational picture running at all times, the way a building keeps its emergency systems running. Put her back in northern Niger. March 14th, 2023, 03:14 in the morning. 14 degrees north latitude. Sandstone and acacia scrub, and a compound that had held 28 aid workers for 9 weeks before the intelligence trail led here. She counted them moving in the dark. Not as a group, as individuals, because each one was a name and each name was a person, and you count persons, not groups. 26 moving under their own power, 2 being assisted by operators at their flanks. She was already counting toward the aircraft, already calculating, already running the exfil math in real time. 47 meters to the first helicopter, 29 to the second. All 28 accounted for, all 28 moving. The math was good. The math said everyone makes it. Senior Master Sergeant Owen Reyes, Iron Lady 4, 19 years in special operations. The person she had trusted to be at the rear element, because she trusted no one more in an exfil contact scenario, was 19 meters from the helicopter. He turned. The cooked grenade came from the direction of a contact they had not fully suppressed, 31 meters to the rear left. Nobody else saw it first. Nobody else was positioned to reach it in time. Owen turned toward it at 19 meters from the helicopter because the math was simple, and Owen had always been fast at the math. One person absorbing the blast radius against 28 people who were not yet inside the aircraft and would not be for another 11 seconds. He turned. He covered the distance. The rest of the math resolved itself. She had written the after action in a C-17 over the Atlantic, with her jacket folded over her face in the dark, and the classified report open in her lap, 312 pages. And she had written it with the same block letter precision she used for everything, because precision was the only form of honoring she knew how to do. And she was going to honor the whole thing, the operation, the people, the outcome, all of it, by writing it down as exactly as she could. The citation came later. A building in Virginia, a blank document, the impossible project of putting what Owen did into language that a citation is written in. She had tried 6 drafts. The 7th was the one she filed. It did not say what she wanted it to say. No citation does. The ceremony was a closed room in the Pentagon. 4 senior officers and one legal witness. No family permitted. No photographer. A 3-star general read the citation. West Africa. Sustained personal risk over a 14-month operational period. Recovery of 28 civilian personnel. And pinned a ribbon while she stood at attention and looked at a point on the wall behind his shoulder. He thanked her by her first name when it was done. She thanked him by his. He nodded. That was all. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the 8 figures on the dark tarmac, one of them with a hand on her shoulder. Her secure phone buzzed once on the desk beside the coin. One line, no contact name attached. Package confirmed. Timing your call. The camera had everything it needed. The audit closed in 72 hours. She put the phone face down. She placed the 3 items back in the drawer and turned the key. She turned off the desk lamp and sat in the dark for 1 full beat, certain, carrying something the room could not contain, and the antagonist would never understand. Then she lay down and closed her eyes. 3 more days, Owen. Day 4. The inspection came at mid-morning. A routine courtesy inspection of her field bag under classified material proximity protocols, standing policy for non-cleared personnel operating near classified workspaces. The policy was real, the application was not. Halverson gave the instruction with the careful, modulated phrasing of a man who has decided to cross a line and wants the phrasing documented in a way that could theoretically support a different reading later. Staff Sergeant Kimura received the primary instruction. He received a secondary instruction, verbal, quiet, as Halverson was already turning back to his desk. She arrived at the S4 conference room when notified. She placed her field bag on the table without being asked, unzipped the main compartment, and stepped back. Hands clasped behind her back, weight distributed evenly, chin level. She watched them work with the specific quality of attention that is not watching for anything, but is also not watching. The 12-second sweep ran across the room. Door, window, second entrance, ceiling. Back to their hands. She did not pause it or redirect it. It ran the way breathing runs, without announcement, without decision, as natural and continuous as a heart working. Corporal Reyes Okafor searched the outer pockets in sequence, working methodically, the way someone searches who has been told exactly what to do and intends to do it in the correct order. His left hand, on the third pocket, partially obscured by his own forearm, produced a small, matte black USB drive from inside his jacket and placed it in the back inner pocket of the write-in-rain notebook. The motion took less than 2 seconds. It was invisible to any observer without a direct and unobstructed line of sight to the space between his arm and his body. The collar button camera on her civilian polo had a direct and unobstructed line of sight to that space. It had been recording continuously since 0530 on day 1, uploading in real time at a frame rate calibrated for facial identification and object tracking, transmitting to a DoD contracted facility in Arlington, Virginia. The footage at this moment showed Corporal Reyes Okafor's face in clean overhead light, the object in his hand, the notebook pocket it went into, timestamp, geolocation, continuous chain of custody, unbroken, legally airtight. She picked up the field bag. She started for the door. She stopped. She turned. Halverson was in the doorway with his arms crossed, the posture of a man surveying a completed task. She looked at him, not at his collar, not at his chest, at his face. The full direct assessment of a person who has looked at a great many faces in a great many contexts and has developed over time a very precise sense of what they contain. She smiled, small, private, not triumphant, amused. The specific amusement of someone who has just heard the punchline to a joke the teller doesn't know they've been telling. Something funny, Ms. Sterling? No, Captain. Not yet. She walked down the corridor. Halverson turned to Kimura. Kimura did not answer. Reyes Okafor did not answer. The corridor was empty in both directions. Halverson stood in the S4 doorway with his arms still crossed and, for the first time in 4 days of escalation, felt something move through his chest that he had not felt once in those 4 days. It stayed with him. Day 5. The dining facility at noon. Nearly the same room as day 1. Nearly the same configuration. 150 Marines, 8 Allied liaison officers, 2 civilian observers. The same corner near the east wall. She had a report open in front of her, and she was eating, and the 12-second sweep was running at its usual interval, unhurried and unbroken, the way it had run every 12 seconds for 5 days. At 12:15, the base duty NCO at the main gate called the operations duty officer. 3 vehicles with Pentagon plates had just cleared the gate. Lead vehicle registered to Marfersoc command staff. The operations duty officer called the base executive officer. The base XO called the battalion commander. The battalion commander called Mears. Mears received the call. He went very still for a full second. The stillness of a man who has just been told something that changes the structure of what he believed he was doing. And then he moved. 3 vehicles. The man who stepped out of the second one was Lieutenant General Lucas Hollander, commander of Marine Forces Special Operations Command. 3 stars. A Pentagon liaison officer on his left. A Department of the Army colonel on his right, carrying a sealed mission packet under one arm. Hollander did not stop at the entrance of the dining facility. He walked in. The room read the stars from 15 meters and responded the way rooms respond. A wave of attention and posture adjustment, moving from the entrance inward. Conversations stopping, officers rising, SNCOs straightening. The particular alertness of an institutional space encountering someone who outranks its assumptions. Hollander did not stop at the front of the room. He walked the full length of it. The room went quiet in stages, conversation dying as he passed, so that by the time he reached the far end, there was complete silence. 150 people watching a 3-star general cross a dining facility toward a corner table where a woman in a civilian polo was eating lunch. She had been watching him since the door opened. The sweep had found him on its second pass, and then she had held, not fixating, not breaking the pattern, just seeing him the way she saw everything, clearly and completely. By the time Hollander was 6 feet from her table, she was still. He stopped. He looked at her for 1 beat. Iron Lady, stand to. The silence in the room deepened in the specific way it deepens when something has happened that rewrites the meaning of everything that preceded it. She rose from the chair, stood to her full height, squared her shoulders. Hollander rendered a full formal salute, sharp, precise, held. The Pentagon liaison came to attention. The Department of the Army colonel came to attention. She returned the salute. Once. Clean. Held for 1 full beat, the same duration a salute to a 3-star is held, before she dropped it with the economy of a person for whom this gesture is not ceremonial. At the officers' table, 14 meters away, Halverson's face moved through 4 seconds. Confusion. Who is Hollander saluting? The contractor. Disbelief. Not her. That can't. Recognition. The shove. The chow line. Tuesday afternoon. The nickname, the coffee, the badge, the complaint, the visitor log, the thumb drive. 4 days. All of it. Horror. 3 stars. She's Army. She's not a contractor. She has never been a contractor. Every document, every badge deactivation, every fabricated complaint, every entry in the visitor log, every item he has done or arranged or enabled in 4 days is in a notebook that is not her notebook. It is a federal record. It has been a federal record since Tuesday afternoon in a chow line in Southern California when he put his hand on her shoulder and told her to step aside. Sterling turned from Hollander. The provost marshal had entered from the side corridor with 2 federal agents in position. She gave one short order, her voice, for the first time in 5 days, carrying the full register of someone accustomed to giving orders in loud environments, without amplification. "Provost, execute." Halverson was placed under flag-rank custody before he reached a standing position. Simultaneously, outside in the visitor lot, 2 federal agents intercepted Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Mears at his vehicle. He was the network architect. He had been the network architect for 28 months across 14 joint exercises in 3 time zones, and he had never once believed the woman in the contractor polo was anything other than exactly what her lanyard said she was. That was the mistake from which everything else followed. Sterling stood at her corner table. Her eyes ran the final horizon sweep of the room. 12 seconds. Wall to door, to window, to entrance to exit, and tracked Halverson the full width of the space. Everyone in the room saw the sweep. Everyone in the room saw exactly what it was. At the senior NCO table, Thrussell watched the sweep complete. He picked up his coffee cup. He didn't say anything. The side corridor door closed. Sterling sat down. She picked up her pen. The 72 hours that followed were swift and institutional and thorough. NCIS agents and DoD Inspector General investigators moved on the S3 shop within 6 hours of the arrests. Hard drives imaged, flash media cataloged, printed traffic logs boxed and tagged. What they found was not a rogue operation run by a captain and an executive officer on impulse. It was a structure, designed and maintained, with an architecture and a money trail and a processing layer that had been running for 28 months across 14 NATO joint exercises. Unclassified but controlled coalition exercise data, skimmed from the exercise traffic flows and routed to a foreign intermediary broker through a Cyprus shell company. $4.1 million laundered through that company and through a private logistics contractor in Central California. 9 indictments across 2 states. If you stayed all the way to the salute, subscribe. There's another mission queued for tomorrow, and the next operator is already in the room. Mears was transferred to federal custody within the hour of his arrest, efficiently and without drama. The way things that have been prepared for are executed. 4 S3 shop personnel were suspended pending investigation. 2 civilian employees of the Central California logistics contractor were arrested simultaneously at their offices, a coordination that had required 72 hours of pre-positioning to execute cleanly, and had been pre-positioned by someone who knew exactly when the arrests were coming. Halverson was confined to base under flag-rank custody. He was never the architect. He was the door. The door had been taken off its hinges. In a small conference room in the base administrative building, Staff Sergeant Lucas McAdam sat across from a federal agent. McAdam was 29 years old, a junior analyst in the S3 shop, the kind of person who notices things and writes them down because his training told him to notice things and write them down, and nothing in his life since had told him to stop. 8 months ago, he had seen anomalies in the data flows, routing patterns that did not match the exercise parameters, traffic volumes that did not match the authorized channels. He had raised it internally, formally, through the correct procedure. He had been told, file it, drop it. The data flows were above his clearance threshold. This was not his concern. He had filed it. He had not dropped it. He placed a small encrypted drive on the table between himself and the federal agent. 8 months of his own documentation, personal log entries, flagged anomalies, dates and times, and specific data points he had recorded without authorization and without certainty that it would ever matter. The drive was a standard commercial unit, nothing classified about its housing, and he had purchased it out of his own pocket at a shop off base because he had not trusted the process enough to document his concerns on government equipment, and he had not trusted himself enough to do nothing. 8 months of something between conviction and fear, walking into work each morning past the people he had documented and saying nothing and writing everything down when he got home. The agent looked at the drive, then looked at him. McAdams said, "I should have come forward sooner. I know that." He had not, but he was here now, and what he had preserved, quietly and without anyone knowing, filled 3 gaps in the timeline that the collar button camera footage alone could not close. The agent nodded. McAdams sat back in his chair. He had the look of a man who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has just set it down, and is not sure yet how to hold himself without the weight. 3 weeks later, the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific sits on a hillside in Honolulu inside the crater of an extinct volcano, and in the late afternoon, the light comes at an angle that makes the white headstones look as though they are lit from inside. She came in civilian clothes, dark jacket, jeans, no lanyard, no polo. The sterile black watch on her left wrist, dial inside, because some habits do not change and should not. She walked up the hillside in the afternoon light, past the rows that went on, past names she did not know, and names she might have known if the circumstances had been different, past the dates that tell you exactly how old someone was when the math resolved in the wrong direction. She stopped at a headstone and stood. Senior Master Sergeant Owen Reyes. The dates carved below it ended in 2023. She held the matte black challenge coin in her right hand and stood there for a long time without speaking. She had learned that the things she needed to say in places like this were not language. They were the act of coming, the act of standing, the act of being still in a particular place for a particular duration with her full attention given to it. She was here. She had been here before, once, 6 months after the ceremony, on a layover that was not technically authorized as a personal stop, and that she had documented as an administrative delay without specifying the nature of the delay. She would be here again. That was the whole of what she had, that she could still give him, the continued forward motion of someone who was still standing, doing the work, building the record, running the sweep, closing the missions one at a time until there were no more missions, or no more her, whichever came first. Owen would have said that was not enough. She would have told him he was wrong. They would have argued about it for the length of a transatlantic flight, and it would have been exactly right. She set the challenge coin on the upper edge of the headstone, balanced where it would stay. Her secure phone buzzed once in her jacket pocket. She took it out. 1 line, 1 message, no contact name. Iron Lady is still standing. Medis in Niamey. She looked at the message. She looked at the headstone. She looked at the coin, matte black on white marble, a falcon on one face and a date on the other. March 14th, 2023. She put the phone back in her jacket pocket. The coin stayed on the stone. She turned and walked up the hillside path without looking back. The camera held on the coin as the sun dropped behind the ridge, and the light changed, and the hillside went quiet. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.